The sun blazed down on the streets of Scottsdale, Arizona, its rays reflecting off the sleek glass exterior of Sun Valley Motors. Jack Reynolds parked his pickup truck in front of the dealership, stepping out slowly with the familiar crunch of asphalt beneath his boots. His red MAGA hat stood out against his otherwise simple attire. A faded pair of jeans, a crisp blue shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and well-worn boots. Yet, the hat wasn't just an accessory. It was a statement, one that Jack knew would spark reactions. Some strong, others subtle. But Jack wasn't here for politics. He wasn't here to buy a car either. His purpose was more personal, a silent observation of how this dealership, a small yet integral part of the company he led, treated its customers. Pushing open the glass doors, Jack was greeted by the cool blast of air conditioning and the faint scent of leather. The showroom was immaculate, almost clinical. High-end vehicles lined the space, polished to a mirror finish under the bright showroom lights. Salespeople moved through the space, chatting with customers in practiced smiles and rehearsed phrases. For a moment, no one noticed Jack as he scanned the room, his eyes lingering on a sleek black sports car that gleamed in the spotlight. Suddenly, a young salesman approached with a nervous energy. "Good morning, sir. Looking for anything in particular today?" Jack offered a soft smile. "Just browsing for now." Before the conversation could continue, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, Jeremy. I'll handle this." Steve Harrison, the dealership manager, said as he strode toward them. His name tag glinted under the lights as he moved with purpose, his tailored suit sharp and professional. His expression was cool and authoritative. But when his eyes settled on Jack's red MAGA hat, a flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Sir," Steve began, his tone polite but clipped, "I'm afraid we reserve our services for serious buyers." Jack raised an eyebrow, his smile fading. "And how do you know I'm not serious?" Steve's eyes narrowed slightly, though he maintained his composure. "It's just a policy. We have to prioritize clientele who align with our dealership's values." Jack held Steve's gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Interesting policy," he said quietly, then, with a slight nod, turned his attention back to the cars, letting the tension hang in the air. Steve's polished shoes clicked against the tile floor as he followed Jack, his demeanor growing colder with each step. Jack moved deliberately, pausing to admire the luxury sedans and SUVs lined up under the bright showroom lights. He didn't seem hurried or phased, but the tension in Steve's posture was hard to miss. "Sir," Steve said, stepping directly into Jack's path, his voice carrying a sharper edge now, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Jack stopped, tilting his head slightly. His gaze fell on Steve's name tag for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "Leave?" he repeated, his tone calm but firm. "And why is that?" Steve crossed his arms, his voice now firm and unapologetic. "It's obvious you're not here to make a purchase. We prefer to maintain an environment that aligns with the values of our clientele. Your attire," he added, glancing pointedly at Jack's hat, "doesn't quite reflect the image we uphold." The room grew quieter. A few staff members exchanged uncertain glances while a couple browsing near the corner seemed suddenly interested in the unfolding exchange. Jack noticed the subtle shift, but kept his expression steady. "I see," Jack replied, his voice steady. "And what image is that?" Steve hesitated for a fraction of a second before leaning in slightly, lowering his voice. "We cater to a more progressive, inclusive clientele. We try to avoid political distractions." Jack let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "Progressive and inclusive. Huh. Except for people who think differently?" Steve straightened his face, his tone sharp now. "Sir, this isn't a debate. I'm asking you to leave. If you'd like, I can recommend another dealership that might be a better fit." Jack studied Steve for a long moment, then glanced around the room. Jeremy, the young salesman who had initially greeted him, stood near the edge of the showroom, looking uncomfortable. Several other staff members avoided eye contact altogether. Without another word, Jack turned on his heel and walked toward the door. The silence in the room felt heavy as Jack pushed through the glass doors and stepped back into the sunlight. Steve exhaled sharply, adjusting his tie as he turned back to the staff. "All right, let's get back to work," he snapped, his tone brisk, though an undercurrent of unease lingered. Outside, Jack stood by his truck, the sun glinting off its hood. He leaned against the driver's door for a moment, looking back at the showroom through the reflective glass. His face gave nothing away, but a spark of something determination perhaps flashed in his eyes before he climbed into the truck and drove away. The afternoon sun beat down on the Scottsdale streets as Jack's truck eased into traffic. Inside the dealership, however, the atmosphere was far less radiant. Steve Harrison returned to his office, his sharp remarks lingering in the air like static. The rest of the staff carried on, though the energy in the room felt off. Jeremy, the young salesman, shuffled uneasily behind a desk, glancing periodically toward the showroom floor. Without another thought, Jack parked his truck at a nearby cafe and decided to do something he often encouraged in his corporate philosophy: observe. Grabbing a coffee, he positioned himself at a shaded outdoor table with a clear view of the dealership. Inside, the staff interaction grew more telling by the minute. Steve resumed his managerial rounds, exchanging a few forced smiles with customers and barking orders at employees. At one point, Jeremy approached him hesitantly, clearly nervous. "Sir," he began, keeping his voice low. "Was it really necessary to ask that gentleman to leave?" He seemed. Steve cut him off, his expression tightening. "Let me stop you right there. Jeremy, people like him," he said dismissively, gesturing toward the direction Jack had left, "are not our target market. If you want to make it here, you'll have to understand the kind of clientele we prioritize. Am I clear?" Jeremy's face reddened as he nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." The exchange didn't go unnoticed by a few other employees who whispered among themselves when Steve wasn't looking. It was clear that not everyone agreed with the manager's approach, but none dared voice dissent. After all, Steve was known for running a tight ship, one where dissent wasn't welcomed. Back at the cafe, Jack took another sip of his coffee, the bitterness complementing his thoughts. His years in the corporate world had taught him a lot about leadership, but this moment struck a personal chord. The biases Steve displayed weren't just about politics. They revealed a lack of professionalism and respect that could corrode an organization from within. Jack watched for nearly an hour, noting the subtle dynamics. Employees avoided prolonged eye contact with Steve, clearly wary of crossing him. Customers came and went, most receiving courteous treatment, though there was an unmistakable air of superficiality in the interactions. It was a showroom that valued image above all else, a value Jack found hollow. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Jack pulled out his phone and made a call. "Darlene, it's me," he said, his tone measured. "Can you set up a conference call with the regional manager for Sun Valley Motors tomorrow morning? I've got some things to discuss." Darlene, his longtime assistant, didn't miss a beat. "Of course, Mr. Reynolds. Anything else you need?" Jack glanced back at the dealership one last time before starting his truck. "Just make sure they're ready for some tough questions." The call ended, and Jack drove away, leaving behind a building that felt far more fragile than it appeared. What he had seen that day wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper problem, a culture in need of a wake-up call. The next morning, the Sun Valley Motors showroom buzzed with activity. Steve Harrison walked through the dealership with his usual air of authority, checking in with salespeople, overseeing transactions, and ensuring the showroom ran smoothly. Yet, beneath his composed exterior, there was a growing unease. Yesterday's encounter with Jack Reynolds had lingered in his mind, leaving him second-guessing his actions. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Jack's visit had struck a chord deeper than Steve anticipated. As the day progressed, Steve noticed that some of the staff seemed quieter than usual, exchanging glances when they thought he wasn't looking. His interactions with customers felt more scripted, less natural, as though an invisible weight hung over the showroom. This wasn't the polished, successful image he was accustomed to maintaining. Meanwhile, across town at Jack Reynolds' office, things were no different. Jack sat at his desk, a stack of reports and emails waiting for his attention, but his mind kept drifting back to Sun Valley Motors. He had witnessed firsthand the limitations of a business that prioritized appearances over inclusivity and respect. It wasn't just about politics, it was about fostering a culture where every customer felt valued, regardless of their beliefs or background. After a few hours of silent contemplation, Jack leaned back in his chair and dialed the regional manager. "Michael Carter." "Michael," Jack began, his voice calm but firm. "We need to have a discussion about Sun Valley Motors." Michael's voice, though surprised by the call, quickly shifted into a professional tone. "Of course, Jack. What's on your mind?" Jack took a moment to gather his thoughts before continuing. "Yesterday, I visited one of our dealerships, and what I saw was concerning. Steve Harrison, the manager there, refused service to a customer based on political affiliation. While I understand that dealerships often reflect the local community's values, a line was crossed. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Michael responded. I heard about the situation. Some staff mentioned it. But, Jack, this isn't exactly a new issue for us. Steve's approach has worked in the past to maintain a certain image for our brand. Image? Jack interrupted, his tone slightly sharper. Yes, we care about the image, but we also care about the culture within our dealerships. Discriminating against customers or potential customers based on their political beliefs is not only unprofessional, but it's dangerous for our business. It alienates a significant portion of our clientele. Michael sighed deeply. You know how sensitive this can be, Jack. There are customers who appreciate that level of control over their environment. A dealership can't cater to everyone, but we can, Jack argued. If we want to build a brand that stands the test of time, we need to be better than that. Steve's behavior may have worked in the past, but it's a short-term solution to a long-term problem. We need leadership that understands the importance of inclusivity, where every customer, regardless of their beliefs, feels welcome. Michael was silent again, weighing Jack's words carefully. After a few moments, he spoke. All right, Jack, I hear you loud and clear. I'll take it under advisement. Let's set up a meeting with Steve. I'll ensure it happens later this week. Jack nodded, a small sense of satisfaction creeping in. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. With the call over, Jack leaned back in his chair. Reflecting on the conversation, there was a sense of urgency. He knew that change couldn't happen overnight, but the seeds of it were being planted. Sun Valley Motors had a reputation to uphold, but more importantly, it had the responsibility to be a leader in fostering a welcoming environment for all. Meanwhile, at Sun Valley Motors, Steve was preparing for another day at the dealership. The previous evening, he had spent hours reflecting on the encounter with Jack Reynolds and the escalating concerns from his staff. It wasn't easy for Steve to admit fault, especially when he felt justified in his approach. Yet, something gnawed at him, a feeling that perhaps he had underestimated the impact of his actions. Steve, one of the senior salespeople, Lisa, approached him in the break room. Her expression was serious, her voice low. We need to talk about yesterday. Steve raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. What about it? Lisa hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The way you handled that customer. Jack Reynolds. He's the CEO. He didn't just come in as another buyer. He's a part of this business, and how we treat him reflects on all of us. Steve shifted uncomfortably, rubbing his temples. I'm aware of who he is, Lisa, but he was wearing that hat. It sent a message. And what message did it send to everyone else? Lisa countered. That we're selective in who we treat with respect? That's not the dealership we want to be. Steve let out a sigh, his defenses weakening. I didn't think it would escalate like this. Lisa nodded gently. Maybe it didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but it is. The culture here needs to evolve. We can't afford to alienate anyone. It's not about agreeing with everyone's politics. It's about making sure they feel welcome. Steve nodded thoughtfully. You're right. I'll talk to Michael about this. The conversation stayed with Steve throughout the day. His interactions with customers felt less mechanical, more authentic. The showroom wasn't just a space for transactions, it was a space for connection. He began to see how Jack's perspective might have value, even if it clashed with his own worldview. Back at Jack's office, the wheels of change were turning. Discussions continued with Michael and regional managers across other dealerships. The tone was set for a broader examination of how Sun Valley Motors operated its branches, emphasizing inclusivity, professionalism, and respect for every individual who stepped through the doors. For Jack, it was more than a mission, it was a reflection of his leadership philosophy. A business should be about growth, not division. And the changes being implemented were the first steps toward a future where Sun Valley Motors embodied a more compassionate, inclusive, and unified approach to customer service. As the days passed, the ripple effect spread. Steve Harrison began reevaluating his management style, striving to lead with a renewed sense of empathy. The staff, though skeptical at first, started to understand the value of a more inclusive culture. And for Jack Reynolds, the journey toward a better business had only just begun, a journey fueled by the simple yet powerful belief that respect is the cornerstone of success. The atmosphere at Sun Valley Motors continued to evolve. The initial tension and misunderstanding had given way to an environment where empathy and respect were the standard. The ripple effect of Jack's leadership and the commitment to fostering an inclusive space began to take root in every interaction, every decision made, and every relationship built. The change wasn't overnight, but it was steady. Each conversation, Each gesture of kindness reinforced the message that everyone, regardless of their background or beliefs, deserved to feel valued. Customers returned not just because they trusted the dealership to meet their needs, but because they felt understood and respected. One afternoon, a young man named Alex entered the dealership. He was interested in purchasing his first car, a milestone in his life. As he browsed the lot, a sales consultant approached him, offering a warm greeting and a genuine interest in understanding his needs. Alex shared his excitement and anxiety about the process, which led to a conversation that extended beyond a simple transaction. The consultant offered guidance not only on the car options but also on the maintenance and future costs associated with each model. By the end of their discussion, Alex left with a car, yes, but more importantly, with the assurance that he had been heard and supported throughout the process. Stories like Alex's became the norm at Sun Valley Motors. Each encounter was met with understanding and patience, creating a space where customers didn't feel rushed or dismissed. The dealership's reputation grew not from aggressive sales tactics, but from genuine connections built on mutual respect. Jack Reynolds continued to lead by example, ensuring that the core values of inclusivity and empathy remained central to the dealership's identity. He encouraged his management team to foster this environment not just among customers, but within the entire dealership family. Employees were empowered to address challenges with thoughtfulness, to celebrate diversity, and to embrace the unique perspectives each individual brought to the team. One evening, after a long day of managing the dealership's operations, Jack received a letter from an elderly man named Henry. Henry had visited Sun Valley Motors months earlier, looking for a simple solution to maintain his aging vehicle. However, what began as a straightforward repair turned into a deeper conversation about his concerns and fears regarding the future. The staff had listened attentively, offering more than just a service. They had offered companionship and a sense of security. Henry's letter thanked Jack for creating a space where older individuals felt cared for, where their voices were heard, and where they didn't feel invisible. These small but meaningful moments painted a larger picture of transformation, a dealership that wasn't just about cars, but about community. Customers from all walks of life began to see Sun Valley Motors as a place where everyone's story mattered, where understanding and empathy shaped every interaction. Jack often reflected on how a single act of misunderstanding had led to this broader change. The road had been unexpected, but it was precisely those challenges that had strengthened their resolve to create a space where differences were embraced, not shunned. Sun Valley Motors had become more than a business. It had become a legacy, a beacon of hope for anyone who walked through its doors. As Jack sat quietly in his office, watching the bustling floor below, he felt a deep sense of pride. The journey had been profound, and the impact far-reaching. Sun Valley Motors was no longer just a dealership. It was a symbol of compassionate leadership and the enduring power of unity in a world that often emphasized division.